moon hung high, a silver coin cast against the midnight sky, painting shadows across the sprawling fields. Out in the remote corners of the countryside, the air was thick with silence broken only by the nocturnal whispers of rustling leaves. But tonight, a storm was brewing. Muffled footsteps, careful and deliberate, crept along the dirt path leading to a tired old farmhouse nestled against the edge of a dark forest. Just inside the creaking front door of that farmhouse, Henry, the farmer, was wide awake. He wasn't typically a man of the night. His routine had always been governed by the sun. But this night was different. He had an instinct, a prickling in the back of his mind that whispered to him, something was not right. Years of labor on his land left him weary, but his heart still pounded with the fervor of a man who had fought to protect his soil, his crops, and his family. As he stepped closer to the window, the moonlight spilled through the glass, illuminating the worn lines on his face. They told a story of resilience, of hard winters and sun-drenched summers, of joy and heartbreak. Tonight would add another chapter to that tale, one he had never expected. In the shadows outside, three figures moved with a predatory grace. They were cloaked in darkness, clad in black hoodies that blended seamlessly into the night. Their eyes glinted with a cruel ambition, like wolves hunting for the weakest prey. They had watched Henry plan their moves. Tonight they would take what didn't belong to them. Of course, they didn't know Henry. They thought him an easy mark, just another farmer hemmed in by isolation. They thought wrong. As they inched closer, Henry felt something awaken inside him, a spark igniting into a roaring fire. A surge of defiance began coursing through him, pushing back against the weight of fear that clawed at his insides. This was his land, and no one would take it from him. Suddenly, a sharp sound tore through the stillness, the crunch of gravel beneath a heavy boot. Henry's heart seized. He held his breath, straining to hear. There it was again, the unmistakable sound of disturbance. They were nearing the barn. They were close enough for Henry to make sense of their hushed voices. "Get the tools first," one of them hissed. "The equipment is worth a fortune." Henry's stomach churned. This wasn't just some mindless vandalism. They were here to steal his livelihood, the very essence of his being. With steely resolve, he stepped back, shaking the fog of fear from his mind. He reached for the old baseball bat that hung by the door. It wasn't just wood. It was a symbol of his refusal to be victimized. Unbeknownst to the trespassers, in their haste and arrogance, they had underestimated the resolve of a man who had worked with his hands, who had poured his life into every seed he planted, every blade of grass that grew under his care. The darkness thickened around them, but Henry was ready to fight back. The stage was set, and now the curtain would rise. He crept out the back door, moving like a shadow, the adrenaline coursing through him, fueling each calculated step. He rounded the corner of the barn, drawing in the cool night air. The three men were preoccupied, rifling through boxes, laughing at their ease, oblivious to the storm gathering behind them. He could hear them clearly now, hear them bragging about their easy score, and anger flared in Henry's chest. They thought they had won already, that they could simply waltz in, take what they wanted, and disappear into the night. But no, not while he still drew breath. With a firm grip on the bat, he took a deep breath, letting it out slowly as he surveyed the scene. The first man stood closest to him, his back turned, oblivious to the impending confrontation. Another stood over a pile of equipment, examining it greedily. Only the third man, leaning against the barn, seemed alert, watching the entrance with a wary eye. In that moment of tension, everything seemed to slow down. Henry's heart thundered in his chest, a war drum urging him on. This was not just about theft. It was about standing tall against those who preyed on the vulnerable, about forging a legacy for the next generation. He thought of his children, of the dreams he held close for them. He couldn't let these men rob him of that future. With a fierce shout that echoed off the wooden slats, he charged forward, baseball bat raised high, and came down on the closest man with a force born of weeks of pent-up frustration and desperation. The sound of wood meeting flesh was sickening. The thief gasped, eyes widening in shock as he crumpled to the ground. Caught off guard, the other two men whipped around, mouths falling open in disbelief. Before they could even react, Henry was upon them, his bat a whirlwind of fury. The element of surprise flickered like a flame, igniting desperation in the thieves. They scrambled to gather themselves, but there was no regrouping now. One man lunged at Henry, fists swinging wildly. But Henry had lived too long under the weight of hardship to flinch now. He dodged, sidestepping the punch, and swung the bat with all the fury in his heart. It connected again with a sickening thud, sending the second man staggering back. The night air was filled with the sounds of struggle, a symphony of chaos as Henry fought against those who sought to take him down. Instincts honed by years of labor gripped him. He moved fluidly between the men, their panic fueling his resolve. The third man, now aware that this was a battle he didn't want to lose, tried to bolt towards the gate, only to find himself face to face with the heavy barn door, unable to escape. He yelled, desperation coating his voice. But Henry, fire burning in his eyes, wasn't interested in mercy tonight. He felt the weight of every hardship he had ever faced wrap around him like armor. With one swift motion, he blocked the man's path, lifting the bat threateningly. "Leave my land," he growled, the words a promise and a warning. The man froze, terror evident in his expression. The battles between good and evil played out in that single moment, and Henry knew he had the upper hand. "You don't want to do this," the thief stammered. Henry spat, the fire within him refusing to extinguish. "You think you can just take what's mine without a fight? That you can come here, crawl across my land like a cockroach, and I'll just let it go?" With the weight of his family behind him, each pulse of his heart echoed a message. He would not back down. Not now. Not ever. Realizing they had underestimated him, the two remaining men huddled together, surveying their options. The confidence they had walked in with was rapidly dissolving into fear. They exchanged frantic glances, and in that moment Henry made his choice. He charged at them again, eyes fierce, bat raised, a lion defending his pride. It was over in a matter of seconds. The 2 against 1 was no contest. The thieves recoiled, desperation pushing them back toward the barn door. They stumbled, legs faltering, and one fell while the other turned to flee. And just like that, the predator became the prey. Henry's voice roared over the cacophony of chaos, backlit by the bright, relentless moonlight. As they scrambled away into the dense thickets surrounding the property, a sense of triumph washed over him. The night quieted, still and heavy after their hasty exit. Henry's heart still raced, pulse echoing in his ears. He glanced around, bat tightly gripped in hand, surveying the remnants of what had just transpired: broken boxes, scattered tools, and pain that belonged to those who believed they could take from him without consequence. He had fought hard and now stood victorious, a lone warrior in the battle for his legacy. The cool night air rushed back in, leaving him shaken but alive with a newfound strength. Standing there beneath the moonlight, drenched in sweat, he watched as the intruders slipped further and further into the forest, swallowed whole by the darkness. And as a cool breeze caressed his face, Henry finally felt the weight of burdens lifting. He had defended what was his. That night, the saga of the farmer wasn't just about resilience. It was a declaration of power against those who believed they could take without asking for permission. Henry was no longer just the man who worked the soil. He was now the guardian of his legacy, shaping his own story against the winds of fate. And in the distance, in the tangled embrace of that vast, dark forest, the robbers had learned one valuable lesson. There is a line that should never be crossed, a line drawn by those whose hand, heart, and spirit forge the very earth on which they stand. The clock struck midnight, its chime echoing through the stillness of the night. The moon hung low, casting a silvery glow over the sprawling fields of Hawthorne Farm, where shadows danced beneath the ancient oak trees. It was a calm, quiet night, but beneath that still surface, the air crackled with tension. Inside the old farmhouse, deep into his slumber, Farmer Joe awakened with a sudden jolt, his instincts churning. For 20 years, he had risen with the dawn and rested with the stars, each season molding him like the clay he tilled. Yet tonight was different. Something nagged at him, an unshakable sensation that drew him from the warmth of his bed and into the chill of the night. As he rubbed the sleep from his eyes, he caught sight of movement outside his bedroom window. Something shifted in his gut, a primal urge to protect that which was his. Joe's heart raced as he squinted into the darkness, spotting figures emerging out of the woods at the edge of his property, 3 hooded silhouettes creeping toward his barn. His mind raced. Were they after his tools? The old tractor? Or worse, were they here to wreak havoc on his home? Joe's hands clenched into fists. Farm life had taught him more than just how to till soil and raise livestock. It had imprinted on him a fierce loyalty to what he had built with blood, sweat, and tears. He moved quietly out of bed, careful not to disturb his wife, Clara, sleeping soundly beside him. Quiet determination filled the air as he made his way down the creaking stairs, heart pounding like a drum echoing through the halls. Each step felt heavier than the last, but there was no turning back. He would confront these intruders head-on. When he reached the front door, he hesitated for merely a heartbeat, considering his options. This was not a movie. There were no dramatic soundtracks, no hero's journey unfolding in neat chapters. Just an old farmer against potential thieves. But those thieves had no idea who they were up against. With a quick glance back at Clara, he silently vowed to protect her and their home. Gathering his resolve, Joe swung the door open just enough to peer outside. The night air was crisp and filled with the scent of damp earth. Adrenaline coursed through his veins as he watched the figures shuffle closer to the barn, their movements clumsy and nervous. "Let's grab the tools first," one of them muttered, voice low and eager. The urgency in his tone sent a chill through Joe. A flash of anger surged within him. These men thought they could prey on his hard work, the very essence of his life. He had faced storms and droughts, always clawing his way back to stability. Tonight, he would not let their greed succeed. Joe turned back inside, scanning the dimly lit kitchen until his eyes landed on the old wooden bat propped up against the wall. He grabbed it, feeling the rough texture beneath his calloused fingers. This bat wasn't just a piece of wood. It was an extension of his grit, his resolve. As he crept back to the door, he could hear the muffled laughter of the robbers, the sound cutting through the tension like a knife. They were brimming with false confidence, believing the quiet of the countryside shielded them from consequences. But Joe had something they didn't: the heart of a fighter. Steeling himself, he swung the door open wider, the hinges creaking like an ominous warning. The 3 figures halted, caught off guard, their faces lit by the moonlight. Joe squared his shoulders, adrenaline firing him up, and broke the silence that hung in the air. "Hey!" Their eyes widened, disbelief mingling with fear. For a split second, they seemed to falter, glancing at each other as if weighing their options. But that moment passed quickly, and one of them stepped forward, puffing out his chest in bravado. "Just taking what's ours, old man." Joe chuckled darkly, tightening his grip on the bat. "What's yours? You think you can just stroll in here and take what you please?" In that instant, the power shifted. The robbers exchanged uneasy glances, the bravado seeping away. Joe took a step closer, heart pounding in his ears. "You need to leave." The air was electric as he stood there, bat raised, a storm brewing within him. The remaining 2 thieves shifted nervously, clearly reconsidering their plan. That fear broke their confidence even more, and Joe sensed the chance to strike while the iron was hot. He shouted again, his voice a growl that rumbled through the night. And just like that, the facade shattered. The bravest of the trio turned tail, scrambling back toward the barn door, and in a flash the others followed. But Joe wasn't about to let them get away that easily. He charged forward, heart racing, legs pumping with newfound adrenaline. The thief in front reached for the barn door, but he was too slow. Joe swung the bat with all he had, connecting with a resounding crack against the man's shoulder. The thief fell to the ground with a grunt, pain flashing across his face. It was chaos now. The remaining 2 thieves turned on their heels, each desperately trying to escape from the old farmer who refused to back down. But Joe was fueled by more than adrenaline. He was fighting for his legacy, for his family. As the moon illuminated the scene, Joe found himself face to face with the last man, panic etched in every crease of his expression. There was something almost pitiful about the look in his eyes, but Joe couldn't afford mercy. "Please." He stammered, a plea for mercy spilling from his lips. Joe stood firm, unyielding. "You think I'm just going to let you waltz in here and take what's mine?" With each passing heartbeat, the fight grew more intense, the stakes rising with every passing moment. Joe had never had to defend his home like this, but the surge of energy coursing through him ignited a spark he didn't know existed. The thief took a step back, eyes darting, searching for any way out. Joe took a step forward, bat raised, an unyielding force of nature. It was just him against the world, a simple farmer standing against the tides of greed. And then it happened. The final robber, shaking with fear, turned and bolted into the darkness. He practically stumbled over his feet, desperate to escape Joe's fury. The message was clear. Joe meant business. Panting, adrenaline coursing through him like wildfire, Joe made his way over to the thief he had struck. The man groaned, pain etched across his face, crumpling to the dirt. But Joe didn't take pleasure in the sight. There was no euphoria in winning this battle, only an aching realization of what it meant to protect his own. Joe asked, his voice low, filled with weary disbelief, "Why would you come here?" The wounded man lay there, shame coloring his cheeks, thoughts swirling as he processed the chaos of the night. There was an understanding that passed between them, a moment where enemy and defender could momentarily share the same soil. "Just needed money," the man whispered. "Didn't think." Joe felt a crack in his hardened exterior. He understood desperation. He had seen it in the faces of neighbors who struggled to keep their farms alive. But that didn't excuse what had happened tonight. "Next time, think twice before you trespass," Joe said, voice steady as he turned and walked back toward his home. Inside, Clara was stirring awake, worry etched across her brow. "Joe, yeah, it's fine," he replied, breathless. But he knew it wasn't just fine. The night would leave scars on him and on the land. Protection came at a price, and tonight he had paid it. He sank into a chair at the kitchen table, the bat slipping from his grasp, landing with a soft thud. Clara stepped closer, eyes wide, concern radiating from her. She wrapped her arms around him, grounding him when everything felt chaotic. She asked softly. "Could have been worse," Joe replied, feeling the tension ease from his shoulders. "But I stood up for us." As the first fingers of dawn crept into the horizon, illuminating the remnants of the night's chaos, Joe realized the storm was not just a fleeting moment. It had reshaped him. They hadn't destroyed the heart of his home that night. Instead, he had found it. Farmer Joe rose to face a new day with resolve, ready to nurture what was his, fiercely defending against any storm, both from nature and from men. And in that moment, he understood that truly living meant fighting against the odds, standing tall against the darkness, and refusing to let fear define him. What lay ahead was uncertain, but one thing became clear. The heart of a farmer beats fiercely, demanding respect, bravery, and above all, the courage to fight for what matters most. And so, another chapter of Hawthorne Farm began, anchored deeply in the roots of resilience, where the soil held stories of battles fought and won. The wind howled through the hills, whipping the branches of the trees in a frenzied dance. It was a night like any other on the outskirts of Ridgemont, where the stars struggled to shine through thick clouds. But as the clock struck midnight, something shifted in the air, an electric anticipation humming through the valley. In the stillness of the Walsh family farmhouse, Farmer Bill awoke with a start. He lay there for a moment, listening. There was something, a shift in the familiar sounds of the night. The crickets had silenced, and even the distant hoot of an owl seemed to hold its breath. Clarity washed over him like a cold splash of water. This deep-seated instinct was a melody he knew too well. Something was off. Rolling out of bed, Bill smoothed his hand over his unruly hair and slipped into his old boots. He had spent decades mastering the land, raising crops and caring for his livestock. Every season brought its own challenges, but the most formidable foes were often not nature's storms. They were the men who dared to take what they had not earned. As he crept down the familiar creaks of the wooden stairs, he glanced at the sleeping forms of his children and wife, Jenny. The moonlight filtered through the window, catching the dust motes swirling softly in the cool air. Any threat to this sanctuary ignited a fire deep within him. Bill slipped out into the night, the cold air biting at his cheeks as he cast a wary eye toward the barn. It was then that he spotted the figures, three shadowy shapes advancing cautiously across the yard, their movements deliberate and suspect. Heart pounding, Bill gripped the railing of the porch, fighting against the surge of adrenaline. He squinted, trying to discern their intentions. Not thieves, not tonight. They were robbers and they were hungry. "Come on, let's grab the tractor stuff first." One of the robbers jeered softly. Bill's heart sank. They had their sights set on his livelihood, the very tools that kept his family fed. Memories of sleepless nights spent calculating costs, tending to sick livestock and harvesting crops rushed forward. This time, it wasn't simply an invasion. It was an affront to everything he had built. Pulse quickening, Bill dashed back inside and rummaged through the kitchen until his hands closed around the handle of his trusty shovel. It had been his ally through countless seasons. As he stepped back out, he felt the weight of the night pressing down on him. He inhaled deeply, grounding himself in purpose. He wouldn't let these men destroy what he had worked for. He would protect his family at all costs. With the stealth of a panther, he crept toward the barn, the shovel gripped tightly in his hands. The robbers were unaware of the storm approaching. They appeared to be picking through old machinery. Laughter mixed with crude jokes floated through the still air. But the joviality faded as Bill set his eyes on them, a fire igniting within him. He shouted, voice booming like thunder slicing through the night. All three men froze, turning their heads slowly. Fear lit their eyes, and for a split second, Bill could see the play of shock and panic flicker across their faces. The moment of surprise was all he needed. He bellowed, advancing. The first man turned to run, the wheels of choice spinning rapidly in his mind, but Bill was already on him. He swung the shovel not with malicious intent, but as a fierce declaration of loyalty to his family, to his home. The blade connected with a thud, sending the thief sprawling to the ground. The remaining two seized on the panic, hastily fumbling for an escape. But Bill was a farmer and a father. He was not about to let them outrun him. Each of his senses heightened, every effort to protect his family coursed through him. Shouted the second robber, hands raised. For a flicker of a second, the words hung in the air, but Bill's gaze hardened. He had heard that excuse before, an earnest plea from men who believed they could take whatever they wanted without consequence. He yelled back, eyeing the third robber who was now trembling. With a surge of energy, he charged. The first thief stayed down, groaning in pain, while the other two scrambled backward toward the barn door. They could sense defeat, but fear can be a powerful motivator. The last man lunged for a wood post inside the barn, trying to pick up a makeshift weapon, his breath quickening. Bill had seen fear before, but never had he witnessed it so palpable. The man was fighting a losing battle, desperately trying to grasp control that had already slipped from his fingers. Bill warned, his voice calm but unwavering. In this moment, psychology rivaled physics. The man's eyes darted, recognizing that he was cornered. The look of defiance began to crumble. Bill felt the thrum of the moment wrap around them like a noose. Here was a chance. He could either disarm this threat or watch it escalate into something disastrous. The robber hesitated, and for the briefest moment, their eyes met, a strange realization taking hold. They were both defending something, yet one was driven to protect a family while the other was compelled by desperation. The line between villain and hero had never been so thin. "Just let us go," pleaded the man, voice cracking as he dropped the post, hands trembling. Bill felt a flicker of empathy course through him. He had fought through sleepless nights. He knew the weight of desperation. "You've crossed too many lines tonight," he responded, although his voice softened. The clarity in Bill's tone resonated deeply. The night air settled heavy, stretching the moment taut. The remaining robber took a step back, and finally, a wave of hesitance washed over him, dragging him into the shadows. Bill didn't need to swing the shovel again. The fear of consequence loomed larger than any weapon. The thief shouted, urgency punctuating his words. Without another glance, they both retreated, rushing out into the darkness as the first thief struggled to his feet, pain written all over him. Bill stood firm, shovel resting at his side, watching as their silhouettes faded into the dense thicket surrounding his farm. The echoes of hurried footsteps receded, leaving behind a silence that mingled with the fragility of the moment. Adrenaline ebbed away, replaced by a mixture of relief and exhaustion. He had defended not just his possessions, but also the sanctity of his home. As he turned back towards the farmhouse, the thought of Jenny and the kids flooded back into his mind. He stepped inside, heart still racing but finding solace in the warmth of his family. The kitchen held the scent of fresh coffee, the sunlight preparing to break over the horizon. Moments later, Jenny emerged, eyes wide with concern. She asked, sweat lining Bill's brow. "Just some trouble," he replied, attempting to mask the weight of what had transpired. Yet the truth sat heavy on his chest, like a stone lodged in his throat. She studied him closely, sensing the lingering tension in his posture. "Are you sure?" Bill hesitated, his thoughts swirling. They just wanted to take what wasn't theirs. There was power in that statement, a quiet victory etched into the morning light cascading through the window. He had stood against the darkness, refusing to let it invade his space. Together, they had built this life, and he would defend it with every ounce of strength he had. As the sun began to rise, illuminating the scars of the night, Farmer Bill found a renewed purpose. He realized that as long as he breathed, he would not allow fear and desperation to define his existence or the existence of those he loved. He would continue tilling the earth, nurturing life from the soil, and raising his children with the resilience that had carried him through countless storms. That day, the shadows behind him faded into the past, replaced by the promise of a new dawn. And in that moment, he knew that the spirit of a farmer would always rise against the tide. The land was not just land, it was home, a sanctuary built on hard work and courage, and he would protect it from any threat that dared to intrude. And so began a new chapter at Walsh Farm, a story woven with bravery and commitment, where days would be filled with laughter, lessons, and a bond forged in the fires of resilience. The night might have been dark, but the dawn had come with clarity, leaving behind not just scars, but the imprint of a man who stood firm against the encroaching night. The wind whistled through the fields, a haunting melody that curled around the edges of the old farmhouse. It was a calm night on Maple Grove Farm, where the stars twinkled against a backdrop of endless black, and the moon bathed the land in a silvery glow. But as the clock struck midnight, that calm threatened to shatter. Inside the farmhouse, something stirred. Farmer Tom lay wide awake, an unusual sense of unease prickling at the back of his mind, like a whisper warning him of impending storm clouds. He turned toward the window, peering into the darkness beyond. It was too quiet out there, eerily quiet. Not even the crickets dared to sing. Tom's heart thudded in his chest as he sensed an intruder lurking just beyond the threshold. He swung his legs out of bed, careful not to wake his wife, Sarah. She had worked hard in the fields all day, her body needing rest. Tom, however, couldn't shake the feeling, couldn't ignore the knot tightening in his stomach. Years of farming had sharpened his instincts. They had told him when rain was coming or when the crops needed extra care. Tonight, they screamed that something was very wrong. With each creaking step, Tom made his way down the stairs, the wood groaning beneath his weight. The flickering light from the kitchen cast long shadows that danced and shifted like specters. As he reached for the kitchen door, he caught a muffled sound drifting through the stillness. Voices. 3 silhouettes crept across the barnyard, silhouettes that moved as if cloaked in darkness. Tom's pulse quickened. They were there to take from him, to rob him of what he had worked so hard to build, and in that moment, a fire ignited within him. This was more than just property. It was his life, his family, and he would defend it at any cost. Peering through the window, he could glimpse them rifling through his tools shed, their laughter a sickening cocktail of arrogance and anticipation. Anger bubbled beneath Tom's surface like molten lava, driving him forward. They had trespassed onto sacred ground. In the corner of the kitchen, he spotted his trusty shovel, its handle worn down from years of loyal service. The weight of it in his hands felt right, comforting. This wasn't just a shovel. It was a weapon of defense for a farmer determined to protect every inch of his land. He stepped outside, the cool air biting at his skin, but adrenaline kept him warm. Each breath felt charged with purpose, seeping into his veins. The moon illuminated the scene, casting a silver light on the 3 men, young and foolish, underestimating an old farmer who had nothing left to lose. Tom's voice thundered across the yard, a deep roar that split the silence. The robbers turned, their faces morphing from surprise to apprehension, like deer caught in the headlights. They hadn't expected to be confronted. For a fleeting moment, Tom saw uncertainty flash across their eyes, but it was fleeting. One of them shouted, but before they could turn, Tom surged forward, shovel raised high. In that moment, everything seemed to slow down. The first man lunged at him, but Tom sidestepped with the ease of a seasoned fighter. With all his might, he swung the shovel down, connecting with a sickening thud against the man's shoulder. A grunt escaped the robber's lips, and he crumpled to the ground, immediately out of the fight. The two remaining robbers hesitated for just a breath, a vital pause that could rewrite the outcome. They sprang into action, bolting toward the barn, their footsteps heavy with panic. But Tom didn't let them escape. He was fueled by years of toil, sacrifices made, and the love he held for his family. The second robber reached for something inside the barn, perhaps a tool or a weapon, but Tom was faster. With deft movements, he closed the distance, swinging the shovel yet again. It cracked against the wooden post as the robber ducked, narrowly avoiding the blow. But the sound of splintering wood echoed in the night, signaling Tom's fierce, unyielding spirit. Tom bellowed, his voice a low growl, each word laced with defiance. The psychological impact of his determination was palpable. Fear began to seep into the eyes of the last man standing, who hesitated once more. Did they truly think they could take from him with no consequences? Across the years, Tom had faced countless challenges, every manual labor-filled day crafting him into a protector of not just land but family. The third robber turned, desperation etched on his face. He pleaded, a tremor in his voice. Just. The onslaught of emotion stirred in Tom. He understood fear and desperation. He had seen it in the eyes of those around him during difficult times. But anger surged stronger. This was not a game. They had come into his life uninvited, and there was no mercy for those who sought to steal the fruits of his labor. "You're on my land," Tom shouted back, his voice echoing through the night. The last robber took a frantic step back, glancing toward the shadows of the barn as if searching for an escape route. With every breath, Tom was ancient oak, sturdy, fierce, unbreakable. Tom took a step forward, shovel still raised. The third robber finally broke, turning on his heel and sprinting away, his footsteps swallowed by the vast darkness of the fields. The first robber groaned, struggling to get to his feet, but Tom was already closing in, shovel poised for another strike. Tom shouted once more, fear and survival driving his stance. The sight of the second man scrambling up, terror-stricken, made him realize just how effective his display had been. They had come with malice but were leaving with nothing but fear. With that, the first robber stumbled away, legs moving awkwardly as he fumbled for a clear path. The two men, deflated and terrified, abandoned the equipment they had come for, disappearing into the night as shadows swallowed them whole. Minutes passed as Tom stood with the shovel at his side, the air crackling with adrenaline. Only when silence fell back over the land did reality set in. He had defended his home. The surge of fear was replaced by a deep sense of triumph, an instinct driving him now to protect what he held dear. As the cool night air settled around him, Tom felt the weight of that moment. He looked toward the farmhouse, where Sarah and the kids slept peacefully. This was what he fought for. It wasn't just a building made of wood and nails. It was a sanctuary built on years of hard work and love. He turned his gaze back toward the stars, their light faint behind the creeping clouds, a reminder that even in darkness, hope flickered. Standing tall, he placed one hand on the side of the barn, grounding himself. He had emerged from the night a different man, molded by the fire of his spirit. When he returned to the warmth of the kitchen, Sarah was waiting, concern weaving through her beautiful features. The kettle was bubbling, morning light creeping through the window. She asked softly, her voice like a gentle breeze. "Some robbers came onto the property," he replied, the shock still fresh in his voice. Jubilance danced in Sarah's eyes, transforming her concern into pride. "I had to protect what's ours," Tom said, feeling the weight of the shovel still resting in his grip. For a moment, silence enveloped them, heavy yet beautiful, as they shared an understanding deeper than words. In the face of chaos, they both realized the invincibility of their bond, the legacy they were crafting together, nurtured by resilience. As the sun began to rise, sending beams of gold through the kitchen window, Tom knew tonight was only the beginning. They had carved out a life on this land, a commitment rooted in hard work and love. This was just another chapter in their story, a foreboding reminder of how quickly darkness could intrude, but also a testament to courage and strength. They were farmers, family, fighters, and together, they could weather any storm. As the day unfolded, the events of the night began to fade, but not the lesson learned. Tom grabbed his kids as they finished breakfast, holding them close, whispering tales of bravery and love, preparing them for the legacy they would someday inherit. And as laughter filled the farmhouse once more, Tom felt the assurance of dawn warming the horizon, lighting a path filled with promise and a renewed spirit. This land was theirs, and he would defend it fiercely, knowing that family stood at the center of it all. In the heart of Maple Grove, life continued growing, thriving, blossoming, resilient against any tide that dared to challenge it. And Tom stood there, ready, steadfast, knowing he would face whatever came next, for this was not just a farm, it was home. The moon hung heavy and low in the sky, casting silvery light over the fields of Green Valley Farm. Shadows curled languidly around the barn, and the only sounds were the distant hoots of owls and the gentle rustle of grain swaying in the breeze. But amid the tranquility, something sinister was brewing, unseen and unwelcome. Deep in sleep, Farmer Jake was suddenly jolted awake. He sat up in bed, heart hammering in his chest, a tingling sense of unease coursing through him. It was too quiet, too still. He listened intently, trying to decipher the night's silence. Then it hit him. There were voices outside, muffled laughter, low whispers. His instincts surfaced, honed by years of living on the land. Trouble was knocking on his door. He slipped out of bed, careful not to wake his wife, Lily, whose soft breaths filled the space with warmth and comfort. Jake had always felt a sense of duty to protect what was his, the farmhouse they built together, the children they raised, the crops that stretched endlessly under the sun. He glanced at the clock on the wall. It was past midnight. Shadows danced against the walls, and he felt the weight of them pressing down. Quietly, he made his way down the creaky staircase, each step a heartbeat echoing through the dark. As he reached the front door, the muffled sounds became clearer. They were close, too close. A surge of anger swelled within him. Who were these intruders invading his sanctuary, his hard-earned life? He could feel flames of fury licking at the edges of his resolve. Peering through the cracked doorway, he caught sight of 3 figures lurking around his barn, their backs turned to him. They were young men, eyes glinting with mischief under the moon's glow. Jake's heart raced. They were here to steal from him, to take what he had worked so hard to build. His fingers grazed the wall until he found his old pitchfork, its handle familiar and reassuring. Jake steadied his breath, heart thudding in his ears, trying to calm the storm brewing within him. This wasn't just a matter of property. This was a fight for his family, his legacy. He had faced fierce storms and blinding sun in his years of farming, but none like this. The sun had set on far too many dreams for others. He wasn't about to let it set on his. With determination, Jake stepped outside, the cool night air hitting him like a splash of water. Immediately, the robbers turned, startled, raw fear etched on their faces. They thought they were invincible, taking advantage of the quiet countryside. They hadn't expected a farmer ready to defend what he loved. Jake shouted, voice cutting through the darkness. The robbers froze, and for a fraction of a second, time stood still. Jake could see the wheels turning in their heads, staring at him as if he were a ghost rising from the grave. But their surprise morphed into bravado as one man stepped forward, trying to regain control of the situation. "Just taking a look around, old man." "We don't want any trouble," he sneered. Jake clenched the pitchfork tighter, feeling the wooden handle press into his skin. "You're trespassing." The threat trembled in the air, each word heavy with meaning. The man's bravado faltered just slightly, but it was evident they hadn't expected to be confronted. They were accustomed to easy targets, not a farmer sprung from shadows, shaped by grit and unyielding pride. "Come on, let's just grab a few things and go," another whispered to the first, eyes darting nervously. Jake watched them exchange nervous glances, sensing their hesitation. They were realizing they had pushed too far, the thrill of the hunt wearing thin in the face of real danger. With a sudden rush, one robber lunged toward the barn, desperate for anything they could grab. But Jake's instincts kicked in. He swung the pitchfork, aiming for the man's legs. The metal prongs connected with a loud crash against the old wooden doorpost. The sound echoed in the night, a clarion call, a shout of defiance. The robber stumbled back, eyes wide with shock, but Jake wasn't done. Fueled by fear and adrenaline, he charged, muscle and determination propelling him forward. The remaining robber turned to run, but Jake was relentless. He roared, closing the distance swiftly, pitchfork raised high. The sight of an angry farmer standing his ground was enough to send the other two scrambling. They were fumbling, panicking, as adrenaline shot through their veins. The first robber shouted, frustration mingling with fear. All bravado had dissipated now. The thrill of thievery had morphed into a life-or-death struggle. "You're gonna find out," Jake shouted back, unwavering. As the remaining robbers scattered like leaves in the wind, Jake felt both elation and a deep sense of purpose. He wasn't just defending tools or crops. He was standing up for his family and everything he held dear. The lessons taught by the land were searing through him, igniting a fierce determination in the depths of his being. Jake had witnessed despair in the eyes of those who took more than they gave. He had seen hard work turn to dust, dreams dashed against the rocks of greed. But he carried the weight of resilience forged over countless seasons filled with labor. No one would rob him of that spirit. The air around him buzzed, rich with energy and a palpable sense of triumph. He drew a quick breath, surveying the scene, heart racing. The barn loomed in front of him and the faint scuffling of feet echoed in the distance. The robbers were running. With one final glance toward the horizon, Jake felt a deep sense of victory. He turned back toward the farmhouse where Lily and their children lay sleeping, oblivious to the chaos outside. For them, he would fight. As he returned to the kitchen, he leaned against the counter, panting from the adrenaline rush. It wasn't just the physical exertion. It was the emotional weight of standing against the tide, a restless spirit refusing to be pushed aside. Lily stirred, her brow furrowing. She awoke to find Jake standing there, breathless yet resolute. She asked, concern written all over her face. "Just some trouble outside," he said, trying to mask the raw edge in his voice. She knew him well enough to sense the truth lurking beneath his calm demeanor. "They tried to rob us," he admitted, running a hand through his hair, eyes still wild with energy. Lily's expression shifted from concern to pride, a soft smile gracing her lips. She reached out, wrapping her arms around him, grounding him even as the waves of adrenaline continued to crash through his body. She asked, her voice soothing. "Didn't give them a choice," he replied, a flicker of defiance sparking in his eyes. The warmth of her embrace wrapped around him, steadying him as the reality of the night settled in. They had built this farm together, and it was woven into their very identities. The land was more than just soil. It was the embodiment of their dreams and struggles, each harvest a testament to their hard work. As dawn approached, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, Jake felt a calming sense of resolve wash over him. He had stood firm against those who sought to take, against the shadows that dared to encroach on their haven. Through the years, he had learned that strength comes not only from physical abilities, but from the unwavering spirit that refuses to yield. As he looked out the kitchen window, the sun began to rise, illuminating the world around them. The fields shimmered under the early light, and it felt as if a new day was born, one filled with promise and resilience. Fatherhood had changed him. Each day came with new challenges, but this was a lesson he would pass down to his children to face the trials head-on and defend what they loved fiercely. After gathering himself, he prepared for the day ahead, determined to shake off the tremors of the night. He stepped outside, running his hands over the familiar plowed earth, the memories mingling with the scent of morning dew. The weight of fear had melted away. He felt lighter. The world slowly awakened around him, and he could hear the distant call of the rooster proclaiming the arrival of a bright new day. He moved toward the barn, reminding himself that, no matter the threat that battered at the edges of their world, they would emerge stronger together. As Jake began his daily chores, his thoughts drifted to the robbers. They had come seeking what they could not earn, willing to take from others in their desperation. But tonight, he had stood his ground. He had drawn a line in the sand. Life on the farm demanded toil, but it also nurtured resilience. The hard earth had lessons buried deep beneath its surface: grit, determination, the value of hard work, and above all, the fierce love that bound families together against the storm. When the sun rose higher, illuminating the sprawling fields that stretched into the horizon, Jake felt a deep sense of awe. This was his sanctuary. The horizon belonged to him, and he would defend it to his last breath. In the months and years that followed, Jake's resolve remained unyielding. The events of that night became part of the fabric of their family story, a testament to bravery and determination. They learned the importance of community, a bond forged through the struggles and triumphs of rural life. And as seasons turned and crops grew, Jake taught his children the lessons learned on that fateful night, that they had the power not just to dream, but to protect those dreams fiercely, to stand their ground against the shadows that sought to encroach. Together, they tended the land, sowing seeds of resilience and nurturing the legacy their family had built. Through laughter and tears, they would fortify each other with the knowledge that home was not just a place. It was a feeling, a fire burning within to protect what you love the most. And in this stronghold of Green Valley, life flourished, and shadows remained mere phantoms, fading with the light of a brave new day. Jake and his family remained unbroken, forever standing against the tides of adversity, knowing they had a place in this world, a place to call their own. The moon loomed large in the night sky, silver light spilling across the fields like spilled milk. The world was silent, too silent. The only sounds were the distant rustle of corn stalks swaying in the mild wind and the occasional whisper of a night owl. But that stillness often masked something more unsettling, something lurking just below the surface. In the old farmhouse on the outskirts of Maple Valley, Farmer Tom was wide awake, staring at the ceiling. A sense of foreboding hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. He wasn't the kind of man who usually awoke in the dead of night, but that intuition, honed over years of farming, kicked in hard. Suddenly, a noise jolted him from his thoughts. There it was again, a soft thud, almost imperceptible. He swung his legs out of bed, feeling the cool wood of the floor against his feet. He tiptoed past his sleeping wife, Sarah, whose gentle breathing was a reminder of why he needed to act. It wasn't just their farm, it was their life, their dreams, their future. As he reached the window, he could see shadows moving in the barn, 3 figures creeping stealthily between the hay bales and equipment. His blood ran cold. Robbers. They were here to take what he had built with hard work and sweat, and something inside him stirred, a mix of fear and fury. Without thinking, he reached for the old baseball bat leaned against the wall. It had seen better days, but it was a symbol of his determination. Now it would serve a new purpose. He crept to the door, heart thumping wildly, and flung it open. The hinges creaked ominously, making him wince. He shouted, voice booming with authority. The intruders froze for a split second, the surprise etched on their faces. They hadn't expected him to be awake to confront them. One of them, a tall figure with a shifty gaze, quickly regained composure, stepping forward as if to take charge. "It's nothing, old man. Just taking a look around," he sneered, trying to laugh off the confrontation. But Tom saw the nervousness lurking behind the bravado. Tom stepped off the porch, bat in hand, his face a mask of determination. "You're trespassing," he said, his voice low and steady, a warning. "Get off my property." Their laughter evaporated as they exchanged worried glances. Tom knew he had the upper hand. They were unsure of their footing, and he was fueled by the fierce love for his family and this land, nurtured over years of toil. The tallest robber gestured vaguely, unsure. "We don't want any trouble, man." But Tom stood firm. "You picked the wrong place to look." In that moment, as uncertainty rippled through the intruders, Tom swung the bat toward the nearest man, connecting with a sickening thud against his ribs. The force echoed in the night, and the man crumpled like a rag doll, gasping for breath. The other 2 robbers panicked. One stumbled backward, eyes wide with fear. They weren't used to this. They hadn't expected a victim to fight back. In their quest for easy riches, they had unwittingly stepped into a battleground against a man whose heart beat for this land. Shouted the second robber, scrambling toward the barn door, but Tom was quicker, moving with purpose. He roared. He swung again, and this time the bat came down hard on the ground before the robber's feet, splintering the wood beneath. The man froze, staring at the impending danger. "Please," he pleaded, desperation coloring his voice. Tom could sense the fear radiating from them, and somewhere, buried beneath the adrenaline, he felt a flicker of pity, but it was drowned out by the fierceness of his resolve. This was about more than self-defense. It was about standing firm against those who thought they could prey on the vulnerable. "Get out, now," he said again, his voice low and threatening, the weight of his spirit powerful. The third robber darted past the two men, bolting toward the exit as if realizing the futility of their situation. The remaining robber, eyes darting between Tom and the barn, began to weigh his options. But with a final growl from Tom, he took one last look at his companions, their faces filled with disbelief and resentment. The tallest man yelled, and in a flash, they turned on their heels, sprinting into the depths of the night. They didn't stop until they were swallowed by the darkness, leaving only the echoes of their panicked footsteps behind. Panting, Tom stood amidst the wreckage, heartbeat thundering in his ears. He looked down at the man still sprawled on the ground, desperate grip on his side. Satisfaction and adrenaline coursed through him, but there was also a weight of sorrow. "You don't have to be like this," he said, a mixture of firmness and compassion in his voice. "This isn't the way, go home." But the man could only groan in response, still clutching at his side, pain evident. Tom turned away, heading back toward the farmhouse where Sarah and the kids lay sleeping, blissfully unaware of the storm that had just descended upon their world. He placed the bat back against the wall and leaned against the doorframe, breathing in the familiar scent of home. Lily stirred in bed, her voice light but concerned. "Tom, it's all right, love, just some trouble. They're gone now," he said, reassuring her, though inside he felt the weight of what had just happened crashing down on him. "Trouble?" She pressed, concern mingling with the remnants of sleep in her voice. "I'm fine," he insisted. When he finally lay down next to her, exhaustion settled in, but his mind raced through the events of the night. He couldn't shake the image of those intruders, young men riddled with misguided ambition. They sought an easy way out of their problems, not realizing they had crossed a line. The next morning, bright sun streamed through the curtains, washing the room in golden light. Tom awoke to the sounds of birds chirping and his children laughing in the next room. He felt a pull toward the familiar aroma of coffee brewing in the kitchen, but the chaos of the night still lingered in his mind. As he walked toward the kitchen, he found Lily setting the table, her eyes softer today. She asked, bending over to pour coffee into his favorite mug. "Better," he replied, but the truth was the encounter from last night weighed heavily on him. Just thinking about those boys, they looked so lost. When they could have worked for it, he thought. When they could have put in the time and effort like he had. "No one taught them any better," Lily said gently, catching the waver in his voice. "Some folks don't see any other way, Tom, but you did what you had to do." She was right, of course. But the burden of what he had done pressed against him like an unwelcome weight. He poured himself a cup of coffee and joined her at the table, where the sound of laughter from their children, Anna and Liam, brought warmth to the cold morning air. As breakfast unfolded, the sounds of clinking silverware and cheerful banter filled the room, and for a moment, peace settled back into their lives. The shadows from the night before began to fade, and sunlight washed away the lingering worries. Anna asked, her blonde ponytail bouncing as she spoke. Liam nodded eagerly, eyes full of excitement. Tom's heart swelled. "You want to learn about farming? You're in for a treat." While Sarah cleared the table, Tom glanced outside at the barn, the morning sun highlighting the tools and equipment still intact, still his. He felt rejuvenated. Today was a new day, a chance to cultivate growth and nurture the family they had built together. By mid-morning, the family was hard at work, tending to the chickens and feeding the livestock. The air was thick with the earthy scent of hay, laughter echoing against the backdrop of the fields. But as the sun climbed higher, Tom couldn't shake the feeling of unease. He turned his attention toward the fields, allowing himself to break free from the lingering shadows. As they tended to the animals, he shared stories, weaving in lessons that would hold value for them as they grew. "Farming isn't just about planting seeds, it's about nurturing them," he explained, motioning toward a patch of freshly turned soil. Later, while moments of laughter filled the barn, Tom caught sight of movement at the edge of the property, a figure in a dark hoodie. Instinct took over, a familiar tension rolling through him. The air shifted, and suddenly he felt the previous night's threat looming again. "Stay here," he said, voice low as he motioned for Sarah to keep the kids inside. Tom approached the edge of the property cautiously, heart racing. The figure didn't seem to notice him and continued toward the barn. Anger surged through him, rekindling that old resolve. The shadows of the past twisted together with memories of defending his land, intensifying that instinct to protect. Tom shouted, his voice rising above the calm of the day. When the figure turned, the hood fell back, revealing the same tall figure from the night before. The robber's face was pale, eyes wide. He stuttered, backing away slowly, fear reflected in his features. Tom demanded, stepping closer. Memories of the encounter came flooding back, the emotions of that night rising to the surface again. I need help," the man said, hands raised defensively. "I didn't mean it." For a moment, Tom stopped cold, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down. It was common in his line of work to meet desperation head-on, but this time it felt different. This wasn't just a robber standing before him. This was a kid encased in fear and regret. Tom echoed, a mix of anger and empathy swirling within him. But beneath that anger lay understanding. He had seen too many hard lives out there, people driven to despair, perhaps just looking for a way out. "I wasn't thinking straight. We just needed money for our bills," the boy continued, voice trembling. "Takes hard work to earn what you want," Tom replied, breath steadying. Silence stretched between them like a taut string ready to snap. Tom could see the boy's eyes flicker with shame and regret, a hint of vulnerability breaking through the bravado. "Maybe I can give you a job part-time," Tom said finally, words heavy but loaded with possibility. The boy's eyes widened, confusion painted on his face like a canvas. "Yeah," Tom nodded, firm yet gentle. "You want cash, earn it." Hope flickered to life in the boy's eyes, bringing clarity to the moment. Tom gestured toward the barn. "Come on." As the boy stepped forward, Tom felt a wave of resolve wash over him. He wasn't just defending his farm today. He was offering a lifeline, an opportunity for someone who had lost their way. And in doing so, he felt a flicker of hope spark within himself. Over the next few weeks, life on Maple Valley Farm took on a new rhythm. The boy, whose name was Eric, gradually settled into the routine, pulling his weight and learning the intricacies of daily chores. Tom shared lessons of resilience and hard work, emphasizing that each day on the farm required diligence and heart. Once a mere shadow of menace, Eric transformed before their eyes. Slowly but surely, he learned the value of labor, pouring himself into work where he originally sought quick rewards. Over time, he began to build a newfound sense of purpose. Tom remained patient, sharing stories of his struggles and triumphs. After a long day's work, they would sit outside under the stars, and Tom would impart wisdom, reminding him that life often required patience and grit. The shadows that once loomed large began to melt away, replaced by the promise of growth. Tom recognized that everyone deserves a chance to change, a chance to grow. A community strengthened by the hands of those willing to work together could carve out a future, regardless of the past. As the seasons changed, so too did Eric. With newfound confidence and a sense of belonging, he found pride in what he accomplished. The boy who once crept around the barn in the shadows now moved with purpose, a member of the family. Months passed, and the day finally came when Eric approached Tom, eyes glowing with excitement. "Look," he exclaimed, brandishing a small envelope filled with cash. Tom's heart swelled with pride. "You did well, Eric." Gripping the envelope tightly, Eric revealed a glimmer of resolve. "I want to pay back what I took." With those words, Tom felt it, the cycle continued. The act of forgiveness and redemption, intertwined with hard work, had changed the tides. They had beaten back the darkness that threatened to consume them all. That night, around the dinner table, laughter and warmth enveloped them all as they celebrated Eric's triumph. As stories were shared and bonds were strengthened, Tom knew they had built something powerful, a community fortified by resilience and spirit. The lessons learned echoed through the farmhouse long after that night, reminders that even in darkness, there shines a light in the most unexpected places. And as Farmer Tom looked around at the faces surrounding him, he felt assured that they had sown the seeds of hope, labor, and redemption, transforming the shadows of the past into pathways for the future. All it took was a choice to stand firm, to defend what mattered most, and to love fiercely against the tides of adversity. Maple Valley Farm thrived, enveloped not just in the promise of harvest, but in the vibrant tapestry of lives intertwined, a living testament to the brave hearts willing to fight for what was right and to help others find their way out of the darkness. The wind howled through the fields, sending swirls of dust into the air, a prelude to the chaos that was about to unfurl. Far away from the city's lights and noise, a solitary farmhouse stood on the outskirts of Cedar Hollow, its weathered boards a testament to years of hard work and neglect. Inside, Farmer Hank lay peacefully asleep, unaware of the lurking danger that crept closer under the veil of night. But then came the sound of faint rustling, followed by footsteps that crunched on the gravel outside. Hank's eyes snapped open, his heart quickening as his senses heightened. The moonlight filtered through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. He listened intently, catching snippets of indistinct voices outside. A chill ran down his spine. By instinct, Hank rolled out of bed, careful not to disturb his wife, Emily. They had worked so hard to build this life, it was not just a farm, it was their home. He made his way to the window, peering out into the darkness. What he saw sent his heart racing. 3 figures cloaked in black, making their way toward the barn, their movements deliberate and nearly silent. Panic twisted within him, but he squashed it down, channeling it into resolve. He quickly grabbed the baseball bat leaning against the wall. It was old and worn, just like him, but it would serve its purpose. With every ounce of determination he could muster, he opened the back door, stepping into the cool night air. He shouted, voice echoing into the dark like a thunderclap. Figures froze, caught off guard. The tallest one, with a scarred face, turned to face Hank, a wild glint in his eyes. Just hunting for some equipment, he stammered, false bravado coating his words. Hank's anger flared. You're trespassing. Instead of retreating, the robbers stared him down, calculating their next move. That's when Hank saw it, the glimmer of a knife in the scarred man's pocket as he shifted nervously. Fear swelled inside Hank, but he buried it beneath a tide of adrenaline. What came next played out like a scene straight from a nightmare and a dream, both colliding with terrifying force. The scarred man lunged at him, and Hank swung the bat, connecting with a sickening crack against the man's arm. A scream pierced the night air, and the other 2 men, now filled with panic, shifted into action. The second thief grabbed a nearby shovel, but Hank was faster, swinging the bat again with everything he had. It wasn't just a bat in his hands. It was a lifeline, a promise to Emily and their 2 kids that he wouldn't let this happen. The second robber stumbled backward, dropping the shovel as Hank plunged forward, a whirlwind of fury and protection. Hank shouted, "Get off my land!" The remaining robber lurked behind a wooden fence, eyes darting in fear, weighing the odds. Hank could see the uncertainty in his stance, the sweat beading on his forehead. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was a battle for survival against those who believed they could invade his sanctuary. With one final swing, Hank struck the first man again, knocking him to the ground. The sound of the impact echoed in his ears, drowning out the thoughts of fear that threatened to creep in. It was raw and visceral, the kind of emotion that ignites a fire in your belly. This was no longer about just defending a piece of land. It was about defending everything he loved. The last man hesitated, glancing between his fallen comrades and Hank, who stood firm, unwavering, and defiant. Adrenaline surged through Hank, making every breath feel alive, but it was the look in the young man's eyes that caught him off guard. There was desperation there, a flicker of something deeper than mere greed. The last robber blurted. Hank spat back, his voice a low growl. As if the air had thickened, the tension felt palpable. Hank could see the weight of regret begin to press down on the robber's shoulders, his bravado slipping like sand through an hourglass. Desperation made the young man look younger, smaller. And for a brief moment, Hank, too, was transported back to his younger years, when his own choices hadn't always been wise, when desperation had led him to make decisions he wasn't proud of. but he knew that this wasn't the answer. "Get out now," Hank commanded, lowering the bat even as his heart raced. With a frantic glance at his fallen partner, the last robber bolted, sprinting toward the tree line, the shadows swallowing him whole. As Hank stood there, breathless, the realization that the danger had passed washed over him like a cool breeze. The first man groaned, clutching his side. Hank turned his gaze to him, grounding himself. This wasn't just victory over intruders. It was a moment that crystallized the duty he carried to protect his family, his home, his life. The sound of Hank's heartbeat gradually faded into silence, replaced by the soft rustle of leaves and distant sounds of the night. He bent down to the man sprawled on the ground, eyes narrowed. Hank asked. The robber grimaced, pain etched across his features. "You don't understand," he spat, though the bravado had long since evaporated. Hank felt a flicker of empathy mixed with anger. "You think this is the answer? There's no future in stealing." The man snapped back, desperation spilling over. With the weight of reality lingering in the air like smoke, Hank backed away, standing tall against the encroaching shadows. He had stood his ground, but it left him feeling hollow. The thief's words echoed in his mind. He understood the struggles of life, having faced many himself, but the choices people made were the true measure of their character. "That's no excuse," Hank finally said, voice steady. "You've got to fight for what you want, not take it from others." With that, he retreated to the safety of his home. Inside, he found Emily awake, waiting anxiously. Drawn together by an invisible thread, they shared a moment of profound understanding. No words were necessary. Their love was a shelter against the storms of life, a powerful bond forged in vulnerability and strength. She asked, concern etched on her brow. "Just some trouble," Hank replied, still feeling the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "But it's over." The two shared a long embrace, and even as the shadows of that night faded into memory, the fear lingered in their hearts. Hank felt the weight of the world resting on his shoulders, the echoes of his encounter still ringing in his ears. As dawn broke over Cedar Hollow, the sun lit up the fields in a golden haze, yet the remnants of the previous night left an unsettling tension. Hank went through the motions of the day, tending to the livestock, fixing the fence, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the trouble was far from over. Days passed, and life returned to a semblance of normalcy. Neighbors came by to share stories and laughter, the farm filled with the sounds of morning chores. Hank put on a brave face, but inside he couldn't escape the thought of those robbers. The memory of their desperate eyes haunted him, twisted by regret and ambition misdirected. One late afternoon, as the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the fields, Hank noticed something unusual. Out in the distance, a figure was lurking near the tree line, shifting uncomfortably as if weighing its options. Hank's heart began to race, the familiar tension knotting in his stomach. "Not again," he muttered under his breath, instinctively reaching for the pitchfork resting against the barn wall. His mind raced in multiple directions, trying to analyze if this was truly a threat or just a shadow playing tricks on him. As he stepped closer, his heart thudded. The figure stepped out into the open. It was the same robber from the night of the confrontation. This time the young man was alone, looking weathered and weary, his clothes torn and dirty. Hank's grip on the pitchfork tightened. Hank shouted, his voice firm but cautious. The young man cried, dropping to his knees, arms raised in surrender. Hank scoffed, fury mixing with confusion. "I didn't want it to end like this," he panted, desperation spilling from his words. "I thought I could get away with it, but things have gotten worse." With those words, darkness crept back into Hank's mind. Hadn't he offered a chance before? Hadn't he extended a lifeline? He felt the tight knot of betrayal forming in his gut. He had stood his ground for his family, but did he truly owe this man anything? "You need to leave," Hank shouted again, pulling the pitchfork closer to him, every instinct screaming to protect what was his. But the young man remained on the ground, tears pooling at the corners of his eyes. "I can't go back empty-handed or I'll disappear, you don't understand." Hank's mind raced. The weight of the decision hammered down on him. This time he wasn't just facing an intruder, he was staring into the pits of desperation. He had made choices that could lead to similar paths, yet here he stood, armed and unyielding. And then Hank heard it, a car revving in the distance, tires kicking up gravel and dirt. He glanced back toward the sound, suddenly realizing the stakes were rising. Seconds later, more figures began to emerge from the tree line, shadows expanding into movement. The same gang. They were back and they hadn't come alone. The young robber yelled, terror plain on his face. Panic surged through Hank as his mind spun with possibilities. He hadn't expected this at all. Were these men here for vengeance, for punishment? The weight of that moment pressed down, squeezing every drop of clarity from him. He had wanted to be a protector, but here he stood, faced with chaos, shadows growing larger by the second. He shouted to the young man, gaze darting back to the approaching figures. But in that heartbeat of a decision, he saw the desperation on the robber's face. The band of thieves closed in, eyes wild with chaos, intentions unclear. Hank took a step back, breath quickening, heart fluttering in his chest. The clamor rose around him as fear twisted into a fight for survival, for his home, for his family, for the very life he had fought to protect. The time for decisions was now, and Hank stood at a precipice, where the shadows of the past could become a new battle, one that would change everything he knew. Would he stand firm and fight, or would he risk everything by letting compassion cloud his judgment in the face of danger? As the dust swirled around him, engulfing them all, the lines between protection and peril blurred, and Hank was about to make a choice that could determine the fate of not just him, but the young man who once sought to take away everything he loved. The night was dark, and the storm was just beginning.